mention it later. I just think there's a point in the preach where I can talk a little bit about India. It will fit well. But yeah, we're off to India this week, so I'll say a little bit more about that later. But we're doing this series on discipleship, and what we're focusing on today is about the issue of actually doing something. And we're going to be doing that looking at Luke, the book of Luke, where Jesus sends out the apostles in Luke 9, and then he sends out the 72 in Luke 10. And I found it quite interesting, like reading the book of Luke and thinking about it in the context of discipleship. It's actually quite a long way into the book before Jesus actually calls his disciples. The first 4 chapters deal with things like Jesus' birth, the story of John the Baptist, Jesus as a boy when he goes to the temple. There's a whole thing about his genealogy, and then Jesus being tested in the wilderness. And then it's not until chapter 5 where Jesus actually calls his first disciples. And you get this sense, sort of reading that Luke at that point, and Jesus is starting to sort of perform miracles, and he's doing healings and casting out demons. And there's this just real sense of wonder about how amazing Jesus is. And that's what really comes across with the disciples. And I think that's what it's like on our own journey, isn't it? Like when we first become Christians, when we first get to know Jesus, there's just this amazing wonder about who he is, and we really want to learn more about him, and we listen to what he says, or we listen to the people who know him, like John the Baptist. We listen to what his contemporaries talk about him, and we look at what Jesus is doing in terms of healing and miracles, and very much what he's doing for us. We have this phase, don't we, where Jesus does lots of things for us. Our life feels transformed when we get to know him. And again, that's what it's like. And then in terms of the narrative, this is quite important in Luke. We get Simon, who becomes Peter, being called in chapter 5, and he's like the first disciple. And it's really clear, actually, that Jesus is calling lots of disciples, not just 12. Like there are loads of disciples at that stage, and they're following Jesus around and listening to his teaching. And then it's in chapter 6 that he actually chooses 12 from that bigger group of disciples, a sort of subgroup. And then really from that point on, the story of Luke really gets into teaching. There's a shift from the miracles and from the healings to teaching. It's very much focusing then about Jesus teaching these people who've decided to follow him closely. And Luke 6, you get, at the end of Luke 6, you get Luke's version of the sort of Sermon on the Mount. But you're also getting more of these miracles and more of Jesus explaining what God is all about. He challenges the Pharisees. And again, I think that's what it's like as a Christian, isn't it? After we get over that first period of time where we're really focused on what Jesus does for us and dealing with our sin, we again go through this phase of like learning. We just want to understand more, and we take on all of that teaching. And then there comes this point, and in the story of Luke, it's in Luke chapter 9, where our journey as a disciple changes. It's not about listening to what Jesus is saying. It's not about looking at what Jesus is doing. It's not about the miracles. It comes to a point where Jesus asks us to do something. And that's what happens in Luke 9, and we're going to read this now. Does someone want to read that out for me?
I don't mind.
Go for it.
When Jesus had called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. he told them, take nothing for the journey, no staff, no bag, no bread, no money, no extra shirt. Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave that town. If people do not welcome you, leave their town and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. So they set out and went from village to village, proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. Luke 9:1-6.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we get to this point where Jesus basically says, okay, it's over to you guys now. You've been watching what I've been doing, now it's your turn. And I made the point earlier, it's important at this point, Jesus is sending out the 12, so as I said earlier, there was this big group of disciples, and he selected 12 from within it, and it's them that he's sending out here, and he's sending them out as a group. And he's saying, you've got to do what I do now. All the things that you've seen me doing, you've got to do that now. And I think that's, again, part of that journey that we go on as disciples, where it starts with, what can Jesus do for me? How can he heal me? How can he deal with my sickness? How can he deal with my sin? And then we start learning, and we're spending time understanding and growing in our knowledge of Jesus. And then there comes this point where Jesus says, okay, now you need to start doing what I do. And this was the point for the 12 apostles. And he sends them out. And one of the things that was quite interesting when I was thinking about it, and I've even said it as I've been talking this morning, I've been thinking about the language that we use. Now, I don't often call myself a Christian. Now, that's not because I'm embarrassed about calling myself a Christian. I just think it, as a word, it's sort of taken on connotations and meanings that are not always very helpful. So I sometimes call myself like a follower of Jesus. And actually, preparing this talk, I've realised that maybe that isn't the best phrase as well, because elsewhere in Luke 9, we read about Jesus feeding the 5,000. And there are lots of people who were going around following Jesus around. They followed him out into the wilderness, and Jesus, had to perform that amazing miracle of feeding them because they didn't have anything to eat and drink, and that's great. But I was thinking about it and thinking, there's something here for us to learn, because I think it's quite easy to just stay in that place of following Jesus around and watching what he does, and listening to what he says and listening to what he teaches. And I think it's quite easy to be a follower of Jesus, but it's the difference between a follower of Jesus and actually becoming a disciple of his. And this series is all about discipleship. And being a disciple of Jesus means that you actually have to act. You have to do something. You have to actually start imitating what Jesus does, rather than just following him around. See, we knew the names of the 12 apostles. We don't know the names of the 5,000 people in the crowd that Jesus fed. And I don't want to be just another anonymous follower of Jesus. You see, we can come to church, can't we? We can do those things, but it's got to make a difference in our lives. We've got to act on the things we hear and the things that we learn. We've got to act on the things that we see Jesus doing. We've got to have our focus on him. And I know there's been times in my life where, I've come here, but actually my intention is elsewhere. I'm just sort of following him around, but not really being a disciple of Jesus. It's a very interactive relationship. Perhaps we could have the next slide, Nick, because a few verses later, after those that we've just read, where it talks about Jesus sending the apostles out, and they did all those things that they saw Jesus doing. They healed the sick, they cast out demons, they did all those things that Jesus did. And when they came back, they reported to Jesus what they had done. So there's this sort of mentoring aspect to it. And you can imagine Jesus having the conversation about, well, whose house did you stay at? You know, and how many people did you heal? What did you heal them of? What was it like? I said to go with no staff, no money. How was that? How did you find that? Because sometimes Jesus asks us to take risks, doesn't he? But he's interested in that. And the reason why he asks us to do those things is to stretch our faith. And what I found really interesting when I was looking at Luke, and I knew this, but hadn't sort of fully clocked it, that of course in Luke 10, which I think is the next verse, in Luke 10, Jesus does it again. And it says this, after this, the Lord appointed 72 others. So I don't think this was the 12 apostles, I think this is 72 other people. And he sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. So that first sending out with the 12 apostles was like a bit of a pilot, and now he's sending out like 72. And I think that's often the case. There are those who go and are pioneers. So the 12 were very much pioneering there for Jesus. That's the first time he'd sent people out to do things in his name. And it worked. So now he's sending out the 72. And I think some of us are called to pioneer, but some of us are called to follow, or be part of the 72. I don't think we need to be elitist about this, and I don't think there's a particular problem about whether we're called to be part of the 12 or be called to be part of the 72. In fact, elsewhere we learn, isn't it, the first will be last and the last will be first. So, let's not worry about it. But the point is that these disciples were willing to serve. They were willing to act. They were willing to go out. They were willing to be different to those that were just following Jesus around in the desert, who needed to be fed like the 5,000. And the other thing about the 72, this is what Jesus said. There's not enough, 72 isn't enough. Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his field. You see, Jesus looks, and he's looking for people who will act. He's looking for people to take action. And he's saying, and he's telling the disciples, there's not enough. He's sending out 72, there's not enough. We need more people. And I think that's the call. That call still remains today. We look around the world, we look at everything in the world, and we look at the need in the world, and there's not enough of us. We need more of us to be going out into the harvest field, and acting and doing what Jesus is calling us to do. And if you're not convinced that the need to act is a key part of what discipleship is all about, there's another verse in James which sets it out quite bluntly, really. Does someone want to read this one out for me?
Yes. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead.
Thanks, Sophie. Now, I don't want you to leave today feeling guilty. That's not my intention. But just really emphasising this point that if we're disciples of Jesus, if we profess to be disciples of Jesus, it's got to result in something happening. It's got to mean something. It's not just a label. It's got to result in action. And that's what James is saying very clearly here, that there's got to be that sort of heart response when we see a need. And our world is so needy, isn't it? It is so needy. And the call is to be out there doing something. So you're sat there, maybe, hopefully, thinking, yes, Colin, I'm with you. I want to be one of those 12. I want to be one of those 72. I don't want to just be number 4,327 following Jesus around in the desert. You want to be one of those 72. But where do I start? I hear you cry. Where do I start, Colin? So the first thing I just want to say is, don't rush out and do something reckless on your own. Don't be sat there thinking, right, I'm going to run off by myself to some deep, dark corner of Africa and, don't do that. Because I think it's important what Jesus did. He sent people at least out in pairs, and when he sent the 12 of them out, he sent them out in a group. And that's an example that we see often in Scripture of people working together. You have Peter and John in Acts 3, you have Paul and Barnabas being sent out from the church in Antioch. There's lots and lots of examples where it was people working together. Jesus' great idea is the church. That's why he's put us in the church. We're meant to work this out together. This isn't something that you do on your own. So I just want to make that really, really clear. This is about working in teams and acting together. There's lots of things I could suggest that you could do, but I'm just going to do 3. So next one. So the thing about disciples and the big call is that we're meant to make other disciples. So I really needed to say that. And this is very, very famous verses, Matthew 28, the Great Commission. Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. So there's lots in this, but the point I just want to focus on is that one about make disciples. That's our primary call as disciples, is to make other disciples. So that's the first thing. The second point is I think it's good to go somewhere. And this is where I just want to bring a little bit in about India, because Cara and I are going off to India this week. We work for a small charity, and we're going out there visiting some of the poverty relief projects that our charity supports out there in the slums. We're also doing a lot of teaching and training of leaders and churches out there. And it's a real privilege that we get to do that. But we first went there in the year 2000, and it was a very, very profound experience for us. And God spoke to us loads, and it's very hard to describe what it was like really and how profound it was. But that act of going, and really we were going to serve and help people out there, and it's so often the case. You go to give, you go to serve, and actually you get far more out of it yourself than you were ever able to give, and you are blessed more than you ever feel like you're able to bless. But that taking a risk, putting yourself in a sort of vulnerable place, and puts you somewhere where, I don't know, God just speaks really clearly to you. So I think it's really good thing as disciples that we get out of these Sunday morning, sessions, great as they are, and that we actually go somewhere and get out, because I think we learn lots to do that. And I'm really pleased to be a part of a church that has lots of opportunities to do that. We heard a few weeks ago about the team that went to Boomtown, music festival, and how hundreds of people were blessed by people from this church who were out there, loving them, serving them, praying with them, prophesying with them, communicating with them. Brilliant. sometimes on a Sunday morning, we just take 10 or 15 minutes and we go out into Stokes Croft and we talk to people about what's going on in their lives, and maybe we get to pray for them, maybe we get to share Jesus with them. In the past, we've done things like hat trips. Do people know what a hat trip is? Hat trip, again, this is why you don't do this on your own, but hat trip, you pray, how much money am I going to give, Lord? You all put your money in a hat, you see how much you've got, you then look at where you can travel to for the money you've got. That might be by train, that might be plane, and you just go, like the disciples did, without anything else in terms of accommodation sorted or food. You just see what happens. And people who've been involved in those in the past have got some amazing stories of how God has met them and provided and what they've been able to do. You know, but that's really taking a risk. That's stretching our faith. If you want an experience like I described Cara and I's, where we went to India in the year 2000, we with the charity get the opportunity to take people out to different places. So we took Ethan and Ellie, who I don't think is here this morning, came with us to Zambia back in the summer, in July. We're going to be taking another team in July 2025. So if you're interested in coming to Zambia with us, speak to us. It's an opportunity to take a step, do something, get out of your comfort zone, experience a different culture, see what God's doing in another part of the world. The final thing to think about is do good. This is what Paul says in Galatians. He said, whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. And I thought it was really interesting reading this verse alongside what Jesus says about the harvest, because Jesus is saying the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And here, Paul is saying, if we do good, we will actually reap a harvest. So we need to keep our focus on doing good. And it actually says, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. So you have a room full of opportunities to do good. We're all part of a family of believers, haven't we? You have an opportunity to do good in this room, in the relationships that you have with other people in this church. Think about how you can bless those people. Make it something that is proactive. Because as Paul says, don't become weary in doing good. It's very easy to say, isn't it? I've done it. Oh, I'm tired today. I'm not going to do it. But you've got an opportunity to do good. And actually, the promise is, as we do good, is that we will reap a harvest. We will reap a harvest. And it's weird, isn't it, how God works? I don't understand how God works, but we can do good here and bring in a harvest of people. Amazing. I mean, it's especially, so we need to do good out there as well. It's not just do good in here. But I'm just saying there's a room full of opportunity for you to do good. So 3 things then about how you can put things into practice. Make disciples, get out there, and do good. So I really want to encourage you now just to think about how you could put some of this in practice. Because the challenge is to act, isn't it? It's to not just be one of those 5,000 following Jesus around in the desert. I don't know about you, but I want to be someone that Jesus asks to do stuff for him, to be sent out by him. So I just thought it'd be good as we finish, maybe you could spend 2 or 3 minutes just in your small groups again, just thinking about and talking about how you might respond to that today, this week, this month, maybe this year. You know, some of them might take a little bit more to organise, but I just think it would be really good for you to leave today with at least one concrete thing that you're going to act on in terms of following Jesus. Does that make sense? So
Amen.
if you could break into your groups.